All right. Go ahead and state your name for me, please.
My name is Edward Richard Fossum.
And your occupation.
I'm currently a mental health counselor for the Vet Center, which is a part of the VA.
All right. So let's see here. Also, I'd like to state that you are my father, so I'm going to call you Dad here throughout here. I'm not going to call you Eddie. I feel like it's a little weird. All right, Dad. So how long were you in the military?
I was in the United States Army for 6 years.
All right. And from when to when?
I joined the Army in, I believe, August of 1987, and I got out in July of 1993. So
All right. And let's see. While you were in the military, what war were you in?
I was deployed during the first Gulf War, which so basically in August of 1990.
All right. And how old were you at the time?
I was 21. I turned 22, I guess, while I was away in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. And so why was this war being fought? Like, what was going on? Why were you guys going to war?
Well, we went to war as a country. We went over there because Iraq had invaded Kuwait, because Iraq has no shoreline for ports. So I guess for whatever reason, Saddam Hussein decided that Kuwait was not that important and it should become a part of Iraq. So invaded Iraq with the purpose of taking over the country and turning it into a part of Iraq. This was something that was deemed by the world to be absolutely unacceptable. So United Nations and everyone basically got together with the sole purpose of getting Iraq out of Kuwait and reestablishing Kuwait as a sovereign nation, as its own country. So the reason the whole war happened was because Iraq was trying to take over Kuwait.
So Iraq was trying to take over Kuwait, and you guys were basically going over to stop Saddam Hussein,
Well, we,
or
we went over there to remove Saddam Hussein from Kuwait, remove his troops out of Kuwait. That was the sole purpose, really, of what we were doing. Now, during that process, we had to go and go into Iraq and Kuwait at the same time to defeat the Iraqi army. That was Saddam had a something called the Republican Guard. That was his main thrust, his special forces or whatever. Those were probably the most difficult during the fight at the time. But he had what we heard or was known as the Million Man Army. So we had to basically defeat the Million Man Army, specific parts of that being the Republican Guard, in order to force Saddam to pull his troops out of Kuwait.
okay? So just give some reference here. Who was the president at the time when you went to war?
I guess it was the first George Bush.
First George. Okay. And then let's see here. Well, go ahead and tell us the story of when you found out that you were going off to war.
When I found out, it's interesting because I had just gotten married, and I was on my honeymoon. And you hear stories in the movies or whatever about how people have been called off of wherever to go to war. Well, that actually happened to me. I was at my sister's house and my brother-in-law's house in New Jersey, or New York. Actually, I'm not sure now, but I was at my sister's house and I believe it was in New York, Chester, New York, and my brother-in-law comes up to me and says, hey Eddie, Sergeant so and so, I can't remember who it was, is on the phone for you. So I took the phone and I said, this is Specialist Fossum, and he said he had 48 hours to report. So that means I had 48 hours to report off of my honeymoon because we were being deployed for war. So I got everything together, loaded the car up, and we headed back to North Carolina. By the time I'd gotten there, a section of the people I knew, my friends, had already been put on a plane and sent. They were gone. I became a part of the crew that was to wrap up the equipment, get everything together, get it all loaded, get it moved down to the ships and loaded onto the ships, which I did. And then at that, after we'd done that, then we had a period of time before we were going to have to get on the plane and go. So they actually gave us all passes, weekend passes. And I drove from North Carolina to Florida to kiss my mom goodbye for what I thought was the last time, because I was being deployed to war, and my only example of war was the Vietnam War at the time, and that was a war that was fought in a manner that we lost almost 60,000 U.S. Military during that war. It was a very horrific, very casualty heavy war, and we thought we were going to face the Million Man Army. So I didn't think I was coming home. So I did that. Said goodbye to everybody. Came back, loaded up on a plane, and off we went.
Wow. So how long were you deployed?
I was deployed for seven months. It turned out to be a lot quicker than any of us imagined. The worst part of it for us, I think, was waiting. We went when we got to Saudi Arabia, because that's where we went to initially. We had to receive our equipment, and we had to take care of all the equipment. We had to then deploy out to the desert to a spot where we're ready to go from Saudi Arabia into Iraq. But they were doing this bombing mission for the longest time, and we were just waiting to go. The worst of it for us during that time was probably we had regular Scud attacks, which Scuds are missiles that Saddam Hussein actually used to bomb his own people, and when they were in war with Iran, with chemical agents. So we had to take certain shots, and we had to keep our MOP suit, which is a suit that's supposed to protect you from chemical gear or chemical attack, and of course our gas mask, with us everywhere we went. And every time we heard an explosion in the air or on the ground or wherever, the signal was gas, gas, gas. So we'd have to down our gas mask and then put on the MOP suit and wait for the all clear. And that happened so many times I can't even count. There were some days where we just wore the MOP suit and just didn't take it off because we just didn't know what was going to happen.
So how many different countries were you deployed to while you were there?
Well, I was only deployed to two. I was deployed to Saudi Arabia, and then during the ground war, we went into the berm from the desert. We went into Iraq. So I was in Saudi and Iraq. So it was just those two countries during the actual war.
Oh, okay. And let's see here. So what were some of your duties while you were over there? Like what were things that you did on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I was in what's known as a Chinook unit. Chinooks are these giant helicopters with the two propellers on top that spin. So my initial duty was I was a refueler. So we refueled helicopters. We actually refueled everything. So before the actual ground war, we were set up on this homemade helipad, and we would basically take shifts on the helipad to refuel. Actually, one of the times I was on shift at the helipad, I actually saw a Patriot missile take off into the air and saw it hit a Scud and explode. And it was so weird at the time because I was so dumbfounded by what I just saw. The E5 sergeant sitting next to me started screaming at me, gas, 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 because I was just sitting there looking at it kind of like it was fireworks or whatever. It didn't really hit me at first what had just happened. And then I put my gas mask on right away, pulled on my MOP suit, and went from there. So
what all did you see there? What was what was it like going to war? I mean, it's a little different than just being deployed overseas or just going to Japan or something like that. Like what was going through your head the whole time while you were over there?
Just like I said, until we actually went for the ground war, we were just prepared for the worst. And I'd said the Scud attacks was probably the most dangerous aspect of being there. And then when the ground war happened, we actually set up on like a freeway, an underpass, and with this bridge. We were all on the exit ramp of the overpass. Hemet was what I drove, which is a big giant 8-wheeled vehicle with a tanker on it. So it was a Hemet tanker full of about 25, a little less than 2,500 gallons worth of jet fuel. So if anybody was inclined to target us, that would have been a brilliant target because there was we had 8 different trucks with almost 2,500 gallons worth of jet fuel on each one. And that was a lot of fuel. It could have been quite an explosion. So when the ground war happened, basically they waited till dark, and then they punched through the berms, and of course all the tanks and everything. When the armored tanks went in, and then we were like kind of behind that and followed them in, and we were actually in a convoy into the middle of the desert, all of us, all of our tankers, and we were doing this thing called blackout drive, which is like this little tiny light with a cover over it, like a little red light on the back of the vehicle. And on the front of the vehicle, there was like a bigger light that was kind of white, kind of like a headlight, again with a cover over it so you couldn't see it from the sky. And basically, that's all you had. And you had to, it was no moon, it was pitch black. You had to follow the little dot in front of you. And if you missed it and they made a turn, you could literally take the rest of the convoy behind you and drive out in the middle of the desert and be lost. So it was pretty nerve wracking going into Iraq on the night of the actual ground war. So that was a
Sounds nuts. Yeah.
yeah, it was a pretty interesting thing. And we were up all day, up all night, and drove out in the middle of this desert and then basically set up camp.
Huh. So how do you think the whole experience going to war? How do you think that changed you?
Um, I think it changed me, I guess, in a couple of ways. I mean, the fact that I came back was good. I'm kind of happy about the fact that I made it through with completely unscathed. I think I became much more hyper vigilant with different things. I see things like I'm always looking around to see if there's something coming in, or something coming our way, or if we're in a restaurant, I want to be able to see who's coming in and out of the door, and just different things like that. I think I've become much more hyper vigilant. I'm more open. I think I used to be probably a lot more shy and quiet, and then after war, I don't know, for whatever reason, I survived. So now I kind of feel like I have the right to speak my mind, which I will do pretty easily.
So what's your thoughts on the war now, looking back? Do you think it was worth going over there? You think it was the right thing?
I absolutely think it was the right thing. I would do the whole thing over again if I had a choice of matter. The main concept of the thing was the simple fact that Iraq was trying to bully their way and take over a country, and that's just not an acceptable thing. And we had to do we had to do. A lot of people say crazy things like we did this, planned it, and went over there just so we could take the oil or some silly nonsense. I don't believe any of that stuff. I believe that it was all real. It was extremely important, and I think we did the right thing.
Well, even let's say it was real. Let's say, 100% that you're right. It was 100% real. Do you think that America has the right, I guess you could say, to be the world police, kind of like what Roosevelt
Well,
said
we weren't
back in the early 1900s?
we weren't being just the world police. It was a coalition. It wasn't like America was making decisions on their own. It was the UN was involved, and there was many other countries that were involved.
What other countries were involved?
Great Britain was there with us. Gosh, like Australia had troops there, from what I understand. Probably, I couldn't tell you what area you'd have to Google them. I interacted. French had troops there as well. I interacted with French troops. I interacted with British troops. And our own troops.
So were there any other countries on Saddam Hussein's side, or was it just
No.
like the four of you guys?
Nope.
against
It was
this one country.
Nope. He was all by himself because nobody around him supported what he did. That's why Saudi Arabia allowed us to station in that country, because they knew what Iraq had done was wrong, and they didn't have enough of an army, a military presence to do what they had to do. In fact, they were scared that Iraq was going to invade them next.
Really? Huh.
Iraq had a 1,000,000-man army. It was a war machine. The thing we didn't understand was Iraq had a lot of old technology that it was relying on. It had older, I think it was T-72 tanks, and our M1 Abrams tanks outshot those things by a lot.
So for people that don't understand, then what do you mean by it outshot them? Like, what is it? Is it just
So
bigger,
so
or was it more powerful? What does that mean?
the power, the M1 Abrams could shoot a further distance than the T-72s could, So T-72 would fire from here, and shoot. I don't know how far, maybe a football field or whatever, and hit here, and the Abrams wouldn't have to move and could fire and hit the
So you're saying
Russian tank.
essentially our tanks were able to shoot further than their tanks.
Yep.
So we could stay further back.
They were
and
they were
demolish them.
newer, stronger, could shoot further, could shoot on the move. That was the other thing. The T-72s had to stop the fire. An M1 could shoot on the move.
Oh, so you could be moving
At
and
the
shooting
time,
at the same time.
at the time, it was the number one tank in the world, and it was the latest and greatest, the newest technology. It was also untested in a wartime. That war was the first time that the M1 Abrams tank was tested in a wartime situation, and it passed with flying colors.
Wow. Okay. All right. So, no, I think that's it. All right.
All right. So
Anything else you want to add there before we?
nope. I
finish
think
up?
we got a lot of information.
All right. That
Good.
works. Thank you, sir.
All right. Bye.